Beneath 3 miles of Antarctic ice lies a secret that could rewrite human history. Not the history of the last few thousand years, but the entire story of civilization itself. What if the cities we call ancient, Mesopotamia, Egypt, the Indus Valley, were not the beginning, but echoes of something far older? What if the first chapter of human achievement was written not in desert sands, but on a continent now locked in eternal winter? Antarctica was not always frozen. This is not speculation, but geological fact. Core samples pulled from deep beneath the ice reveal pollen from ancient forests, fossilized wood from temperate trees, and sediments that speak of rivers flowing through valleys where today there is only silence. 90 million years ago, dinosaurs walked through Antarctic rainforests. 34 million years ago, the continent still hosted vegetation. Even as recently as a few million years ago, parts of Antarctica experienced ice-free periods, with climates comparable to modern-day Patagonia or New Zealand. The transformation from green to white happened gradually over tens of millions of years, but within that vast timeline were windows, brief geological moments when Antarctica could have supported not just plant life, but human life. During the last ice age, which ended roughly 12,000 years ago, global sea levels were hundreds of feet lower than today. Land bridges connected continents. Coastlines extended far beyond their current boundaries. In this different world, Antarctica's northern reaches may have been accessible, perhaps even habitable. Consider the implications. If early humans reached Australia by sea 50,000 years ago, crossing open ocean with nothing but primitive watercraft, then the notion of reaching Antarctica's outer edges becomes less impossible. The Drake Passage, that violent stretch of ocean separating South America from Antarctica, is formidable, but not infinite. Ancient peoples who navigated by stars, who read currents and winds, who settled every habitable island in the Pacific, could they have sailed further south? Could they have found, in Antarctica's coastal regions, a land not yet consumed by ice? Modern satellite imagery has revealed what lies beneath the frozen surface. The Gamburtsev Mountains, a range as vast as the Alps, remained completely unknown until the 1950s, despite being larger than many European countries. They rise from the bedrock beneath East Antarctica, their peaks still shrouded under miles of ice. Radar mapping shows ancient river valleys carved into the continental bedrock, channels that once carried flowing water across landscapes we cannot see. Lake Vostok, sealed beneath the ice for perhaps 15 million years, holds liquid water warmed by geothermal heat from below. If water can remain liquid in such conditions, what else might be preserved? The ice itself is an archive of extraordinary precision. Each layer represents a year of snowfall, compressed over time into a readable record of Earth's atmospheric history. Scientists drilling these cores can trace carbon dioxide levels, temperature fluctuations, and even volcanic eruptions back hundreds of thousands of years. Within these frozen pages appears evidence of sudden, catastrophic change. Around 12,900 years ago, the planet entered a period called the Younger Dryas, a sharp, dramatic cooling that lasted more than 1,000 years. Temperatures plummeted, glaciers advanced, entire ecosystems collapsed within decades. If a civilization existed in Antarctica during the warming period before the Younger Dryas, this event would have been apocalyptic. Imagine a culture adapted to temperate conditions, perhaps thriving in the valleys between mountains, sustained by forests and rivers. Then, within a single human lifetime, the climate shifts. Snow begins to fall and does not melt. Rivers freeze. Trees die. The ice advances, slowly at first, then with gathering momentum. There would be no fighting such a force. There would only be flight or burial. This is not merely a hypothetical catastrophe. We know that rapid climate change has destroyed civilizations. The Bronze Age collapse around 1200 BCE saw multiple advanced societies fall simultaneously, possibly due to drought and cooling. The Akkadian Empire in Mesopotamia ended when shifting weather patterns brought decades of failed harvests. The Maya abandoned their cities when water sources dried up. If climate can erase civilizations in recorded history, imagine what it could do in prehistory, when there were no written records to preserve memory, when survival depended on oral tradition alone. The silence of Antarctica is therefore not empty. It is the silence of something buried, something waiting. Every few years, the ice reveals a fragment, a meteorite that fell millions of years ago, a perfectly preserved seal from ancient times, microbes that have survived in isolation longer than our species has existed. Each discovery is a reminder that ice does not destroy. Ice preserves. It locks away whatever it touches in a state of suspension, protecting it from decay, from erosion, from time itself. If ruins exist beneath the Antarctic ice, they would be among the best preserved archaeological sites on Earth. No rain to weather the stone, no wind to scatter the debris, no vegetation to overgrow the foundations. Just cold, absolute, and unchanging, holding everything in place. The pyramids of Egypt have endured 5,000 years in the desert. How much better might structures endure beneath the ice, where even bacteria struggle to survive? And yet, we cannot dig. The Antarctic Treaty of 1959 prohibits large-scale excavation, ostensibly to protect the continent's fragile environment. Research stations dot the coastline, but the interior remains almost entirely untouched. Less than 1% of Antarctica has been directly studied by human hands. The rest is known only through instruments, radar, satellites, seismic sensors that peer through the ice but cannot touch what lies beneath. We can see shapes, anomalies, suggestions of something below, but we cannot confirm them. We can only wonder. This wondering has deep roots. Long before modern science revealed Antarctica's hidden geography, people sensed something at the edge of the world. Ancient Greek philosophers proposed the existence of terra australis incognita, an unknown southern land, based purely on logic. If the northern hemisphere had continents, they reasoned, the southern hemisphere must have a counterweight to balance the Earth. They were correct about the continent's existence, but they could not have imagined its ice or its secrets. Their terra australis was a philosophical placeholder, a blank space on mental maps where anything might exist. Medieval cartographers filled this blank space with imagination. Their maps showed vast southern continents covered with mountains, forests, and speculative cities. Some depicted rivers and kingdoms that never existed. Others drew monsters and marvels at the world's edge. These were not lies, but projections. The human mind filling silence with story, emptiness with meaning. When actual explorers finally reached Antarctic waters in the 19th century, they found ice instead of cities. But the impulse to imagine remained. Today, that impulse is fueled by evidence that something genuinely unusual may lie beneath the frozen surface. Anomalies appear in radar scans, geometric patterns that some interpret as natural geological formations, but others see as too regular, too intentional. Satellite imagery captures pyramidal mountains rising above the ice, their symmetry striking enough to spark endless debate. Are these nunataks natural peaks sculpted by wind and weather, or could they be something more? The question cannot yet be answered. The ice keeps its secrets, and we have chosen, through treaty and practicality, to let it. Perhaps this is wisdom, a recognition that some mysteries should remain untouched, some silences respected, or perhaps it is tragedy, a failure of courage that leaves humanity's deepest origins forever unknown. Either way, Antarctica waits, frozen and patient, holding whatever truth it contains until the world is ready to receive it. In 1929, workers at Topkapi Palace in Istanbul discovered something extraordinary gathering dust in the imperial archives. A map drawn in 1513 by an Ottoman admiral named Piri Reis. At first glance, it appeared to be merely another Renaissance attempt to chart the newly discovered Americas. But closer examination revealed details that should have been impossible for its time. The eastern coast of South America was depicted with remarkable accuracy, showing geographical features that European explorers had not yet mapped. More provocatively, extending southward from the South American coast was a landmass that some researchers interpreted as Antarctica, drawn without its covering of ice. Piri Reis noted on the map itself that he had compiled it from approximately 20 older charts, some dating back to the time of Alexander the Great. He claimed to have consulted maps captured from Spanish ships, charts held in libraries of Constantinople, and documents drawn by ancient seafarers whose names were lost to history. If his sources were genuine, the Piri Reis map becomes something more than a Renaissance document. It becomes a window into knowledge that predates the official discovery of Antarctica by 3 centuries. The controversy centers on the southern region. Conventional Antarctica remained undiscovered until 1820, when Russian, British, and American expeditions independently sighted the continent. Yet the Piri Reis map, drawn 300 years earlier, appears to show a coastline in approximately the correct position. More striking still, the coastline depicted seems to match the shape of Antarctica's actual bedrock, the land beneath the ice, as revealed by modern ground-penetrating radar. If this interpretation is correct, it implies that someone, at some point in the distant past, mapped Antarctica when its shores were visible, which geological evidence suggests would have been at least 6,000 years ago, possibly much longer. Skeptics offer several explanations. The southern landmass on the Piri Reis map may simply be an elongated or distorted depiction of South America itself, a common cartographic error in an age before accurate longitude measurements. The resemblance to Antarctica could be coincidental, a case of humans finding patterns where none exist. Medieval and Renaissance maps often included speculative continents based on classical theories rather than actual observation. The map might reflect geographical guesswork that happened by chance to align loosely with reality. Yet the Piri Reis map is not alone. In 1531, French cartographer Oronteus Phineus published a world map that depicted a massive southern continent labeled Terra Australis. This continent was shown with mountain ranges, rivers, and coastal details. When modern researchers compared the Phineus map to satellite surveys of Antarctica's subglacial topography, they found curious similarities. The continent's general shape, the division between East and West Antarctica, and even the approximate positions of certain mountain ranges seemed to correlate with features that would not be confirmed until the 20th century. The Buach map of 1737 adds another layer to the mystery. Philippe Buach, a French geographer, created a map showing Antarctica divided into two separate landmasses, with a sea between them. At the time, this was considered purely theoretical. No explorer had penetrated far enough south to confirm whether Antarctica was one landmass or many. Yet modern radar imaging has revealed that Antarctica is indeed composed of two major land areas, East and West Antarctica, separated by a depression where the trans-Antarctic mountains rise. Without ice, this depression would be filled by ocean, creating two distinct islands. How could Buach have known this in 1737? The conventional explanation is that Buach based his map on logical speculation and existing geographic theories, and that the similarities are coincidental. But for those who suspect deeper mysteries, these maps become evidence of a lost cartographic tradition, a chain of knowledge preserved through copying and recopying, originating in some ancient source that actually observed Antarctica before the ice arrived. This brings us to a troubling question. Who could have mapped Antarctica's ice-free coastline? If such mapping occurred 6 to 12,000 years ago, during or just after the last ice age, it would predate all known civilizations. The conventional archaeological timeline places the earliest complex societies, Sumer, Egypt, the Indus Valley, around 5 to 6,000 years ago. Before that, humanity is understood to have existed in small hunter-gatherer bands, without writing, without cities, without the organized capacity for large-scale exploration and cartography. Yet evidence of sophisticated ancient seafaring continues to surprise researchers. Polynesians navigated thousands of miles across the Pacific using only stars, wave patterns, and bird migrations, settling islands invisible from any mainland. This was accomplished without compasses, sextants, or written records. Only oral tradition and accumulated knowledge passed through generations. If such feats were possible in the Pacific, might similar traditions have existed elsewhere, in cultures that left no written record but possessed profound practical knowledge? Some researchers point to the Phoenicians, master sailors of the ancient Mediterranean, who may have ventured far beyond the Pillars of Hercules into the Atlantic. Ancient texts hint at voyages to distant lands, though specifics are vague. Could Phoenician knowledge, or that of an even earlier maritime culture, have included information about southern lands? Could fragments of such knowledge have survived in the form of copied maps, gradually corrupted and reinterpreted through centuries, until they reached the hands of Renaissance cartographers who themselves did not understand what they were drawing? Another possibility, more radical, suggests that the maps preserve memory of a lost civilization, capable of global exploration. This civilization, according to the hypothesis, thrived during a warmer period and developed advanced navigation techniques. When catastrophe struck, perhaps the Younger Dryas cooling event, survivors carried fragments of knowledge to various refuges around the world. These fragments, including maps, were preserved by successor cultures and eventually surfaced in medieval and Renaissance archives, their origins forgotten, but their information intact. The problem with all such theories is the absence of direct evidence. No ancient chart has been found that explicitly predates the supposed cataclysm. No stone tablet describes expeditions to Antarctica. The maps we have are copies of copies, filtered through centuries and cultures, each transcription potentially introducing errors or embellishments. Tracing them back to an original source is like following a river upstream through countless tributaries. The further back you go, the more fragmented and uncertain the trail becomes. And yet, the maps remain. They sit in libraries and museums, their coastlines and land masses preserved in ink and parchment. Whether they represent extraordinary coincidence, clever speculation, or genuine forgotten knowledge, they continue to provoke wonder. They are invitations to question what we think we know about the past, reminders that history's boundaries are not as fixed as textbooks suggest. If Antarctica was indeed mapped in antiquity, it raises questions that extend far beyond cartography. It implies observation, which implies presence. Someone would have needed to sail close enough to Antarctica's shores to chart its coastline with at least approximate accuracy. They would have needed the technology to survive southern ocean storms, the navigational skill to find their way home, and the cultural infrastructure to record and preserve what they discovered. This is not the portrait of primitive humanity scratching out survival in the Stone Age. This is something more organized, more capable, more mysterious. The silence of the historical record becomes, in this light, not an absence of civilization, but a wound in memory, a gap where something once existed but has been forgotten. Maps may be the scar tissue over that wound, the only trace remaining of knowledge that once flourished and then vanished. Whether we will ever confirm their origins or whether they will remain forever ambiguous, no one can say. But they invite us to keep asking, to keep searching, to refuse the comfort of certainty when mystery might hold truth. Antarctica's biography is written in stone, ice, and time. Geologists reading this record have uncovered a history so dramatic, so contrary to the frozen wasteland we see today, that it challenges every assumption about the continent's permanence. The ice sheet we know is geologically young, a recent arrival in Earth's long story. Before the ice, Antarctica was green. During the Cretaceous period, roughly 90 million years ago, Antarctica was positioned differently on the globe, warmed by a greenhouse climate that kept even the poles temperate. Forests of conifers, ferns, and flowering plants covered the land. Rivers carved through valleys. Dinosaurs, including species unique to Antarctica, browsed on vegetation and hunted in landscapes that would now seem utterly alien. Fossilized tree trunks, some still standing upright where they grew, have been found along the transantarctic mountains, their wood preserved as stone, their growth rings readable millions of years after the trees died. This was not an anomaly, but part of Earth's normal climatic variation. For most of the planet's history, the poles have been ice-free. The Antarctic ice sheet as we know it began forming only about 34 million years ago, when shifting atmospheric carbon dioxide levels and changing ocean currents triggered a cooling phase. Ice accumulated gradually, spreading from mountain glaciers into sheets that eventually covered the entire continent. But this process was not linear. There were reversals, warm periods when the ice retreated, when vegetation returned, when conditions allowed life to flourish again in Antarctica's more accessible regions. The Pliocene epoch, between 5 and 3 million years ago, saw temperatures several degrees warmer than today. Evidence suggests that during Pliocene warm phases, parts of West Antarctica became ice-free, hosting tundra vegetation similar to what grows in Alaska or northern Canada today. These were environments humans could theoretically inhabit. Cold, yes, but not the absolute hostility of modern Antarctica. If early hominins had reached the southern regions during such a window, survival would have been challenging, but not impossible. More intriguing still is the geological evidence of rapid climate shifts, periods when conditions changed not over millions of years, but over centuries or decades. Ice core data shows that the transition into and out of ice ages can be startlingly abrupt. The Younger Dryas event, beginning around 12,900 years ago, saw northern hemisphere temperatures plunge by as much as 15 degrees Celsius within a decade. Such shifts would have been catastrophic for any societies in affected regions. Coastal areas flooded as glacial lakes burst. Weather patterns shifted. Megafauna went extinct. If a civilization existed in a habitable zone of Antarctica, when such a shift occurred, there would have been no gradual adaptation, only disaster. Volcanic activity adds another dimension to Antarctica's geological complexity. The continent is not geologically dead. Mount Erebus, an active volcano on Ross Island, maintains a permanent lava lake at its summit despite being surrounded by ice. Beneath the ice sheet, dozens of other volcanic features have been detected through seismic surveys. These subglacial volcanoes generate geothermal heat, creating pockets of liquid water beneath miles of ice. Around these geothermal zones, temperatures are warm enough that ice melts from below, carving chambers and lakes in the base of the ice sheet. One of the most remarkable discoveries is Lake Vostok, a body of water larger than Lake Ontario, sealed beneath nearly 4 kilometers of ice. The lake has been isolated for millions of years, yet it remains liquid, warmed by geothermal heat rising from the continental crust below. When Russian scientists finally penetrated the ice to sample the water, they found microbial life, organisms that had evolved in complete darkness, in conditions unlike anywhere else on Earth. The discovery confirmed that life can persist in Antarctic ice far longer and in stranger conditions than previously imagined. If life can survive beneath the ice, could evidence of ancient human activity also be preserved? Stone structures would endure indefinitely under such conditions. Organic materials, though more fragile, might persist in frozen sediment. Tools, pottery, even oddies could remain intact in the deep freeze, protected from decay. The Antarctic ice is not a destroyer, but a preserver, creating conditions closer to a time capsule than to a grave. Radar mapping has revealed another astonishing feature: vast mountain ranges completely hidden beneath the ice. The Gamburtsev Mountains, discovered in the 1950s, are as high and rugged as the European Alps, yet they were unknown to science until seismic surveys detected them. These mountains are ancient, formed hundreds of millions of years ago, yet they remain surprisingly sharp and uneroded. Conventional geology would expect such old mountains to have worn down, but the ice has protected them, preserving their original forms. The mountains create a landscape beneath the ice: valleys, peaks, plateaus, where weather patterns once brought rain and snow, where rivers once flowed, where ecosystems once functioned. The question becomes, when were these valleys last accessible? When did they last see sunlight? Geological models suggest that some of Antarctica's interior valleys may have been ice-free as recently as 3 million years ago. Others, particularly in coastal regions and areas with geothermal activity, might have remained partially habitable much more recently. The dry valleys of Antarctica, located near McMurdo Station, are ice-free today due to low precipitation and katabatic winds that sublimate snow before it can accumulate. These valleys have been ice-free for potentially millions of years, creating pockets of exposed land in an otherwise frozen continent. If such ice-free refugia existed during periods when humans were migrating across the globe, they could have served as habitable zones. Small populations might have survived in these pockets, adapted to the extreme cold, relying on marine resources and whatever vegetation could grow in the brief summer months. Such communities would leave minimal archaeological traces. Their numbers would have been small, their material culture adapted to survival rather than monumental construction. But even minimal traces, if preserved beneath the ice, would revolutionize our understanding of human history. The geological record also provides possible mechanisms for sudden burial. Earthquakes can trigger ice shelf collapses. Volcanic eruptions beneath ice sheets can cause catastrophic flooding as geothermal heat melts vast quantities of ice in hours or days. Shifts in ocean currents can alter precipitation patterns, causing rapid ice accumulation. Any of these events could bury a coastal, settlement, or valley community under meters of snow and ice within a single season. Once buried, the ice would preserve the site, locking it away from the surface world, perhaps permanently. Modern satellite technology has detected geometric anomalies beneath the ice, shapes that appear too regular to be purely natural. These anomalies appear as rectangular patterns, linear features, and circular formations in radar data. Geologists typically interpret them as natural features, fault lines, volcanic calderas, or patterns created by ice flow. But the regularity of some features invites speculation. Without excavation, definitive answers remain impossible, and the Antarctic Treaty prohibits large-scale excavation in most regions. The geology of Antarctica thus presents a paradox. On one hand, it confirms that the continent was once radically different, warm, green, and potentially habitable. On the other hand, it reveals how completely the ice has erased surface features, burying entire landscapes beneath kilometers of frozen water. Anything that existed on Antarctica's surface before the ice would now be invisible, detectable only through indirect methods, if at all. The continent has become a vault, sealed by nature, its contents preserved but inaccessible. Whether those contents include evidence of human presence remains one of the great unanswered questions in archaeology and geology alike. Human memory is strange. It stretches far beyond individual lifetimes, carried forward through story, ritual, and symbol. Cultures that never developed writing nonetheless preserve detailed histories across centuries through oral tradition. The Aboriginal peoples of Australia maintained songlines, navigational and historical narratives, accurate enough to describe coastlines that existed 10,000 years ago, before rising seas altered the continent's edges. If memory can preserve such deep time in story, what else might be encoded in the world's myths? Across disparate cultures, separated by oceans and millennia, certain themes recur with striking consistency. Myths speak of lost lands, of great floods that swallowed the world, of ages of ice and darkness, of civilizations that vanished in catastrophe. These stories are usually dismissed as allegory, as symbolic explanations for natural phenomena or moral lessons wrapped in narrative. But some researchers have begun to ask whether these myths might preserve actual memories, distorted and mythologized, yes, but rooted in events that truly occurred. The Greek philosophers proposed terra australis incognita, not from observation, but from theoretical necessity. Yet their certainty about a great southern land raises questions. Did they base their theories purely on abstract logic? Or did they have access to older knowledge, fragments of maritime tradition from Phoenician or Egyptian seafarers, who may have ventured further than history records? Ancient trade networks extended vast distances. Knowledge traveled along these networks, often without written record, passed from sailor to sailor, port to port. Could information about southern lands have filtered northward through such channels, becoming by the time it reached Greek scholars a philosophical principle rather than a geographical fact? Plato's account of Atlantis is perhaps the most famous myth of a lost civilization. He described a powerful island, nation that vanished beneath the sea in a single day and night of catastrophe, destroyed by earthquake and flood around 9600 BCE. Plato claimed the story came from Egyptian priests, who told it to the Greek lawmaker Solon during his travels. For centuries, scholars have debated whether Atlantis represents a real place, perhaps Santorini, destroyed by volcanic eruption, or whether it was entirely Plato's invention, a philosophical parable about hubris and divine justice. But a minority of researchers have proposed a different identification. What if Atlantis was not an island in the Atlantic or Mediterranean, but Antarctica itself? The timing aligns. 9600 BCE falls near the end of the last ice age, a period of dramatic climate change when Antarctica would have been transitioning from partially habitable to fully ice-covered. The description of a civilization destroyed by catastrophe and buried beneath the sea, or rather, beneath ice that would eventually melt into the surrounding ocean, parallels what would have happened to any Antarctic settlement during this period. The sinking of Atlantis could be a metaphorical description of burial beneath advancing glaciers. This interpretation requires accepting that knowledge of Antarctica's prehistoric state survived for thousands of years, filtering through multiple cultures before reaching Plato. It requires believing that ancient peoples had the capacity to navigate southern waters and return with stories of what they found. These are substantial assumptions, but not impossible ones. Human memory has proven capable of preserving surprising detail across vast periods. South American cultures contribute their own suggestive traditions. The creator god Viracocha of Inca mythology is said to have emerged from Lake Titicaca after a great flood, bringing knowledge, laws, and civilization to humanity. Some versions of the myth describe Viracocha as arriving from the south, across the ocean, before traveling northward through the Andes, teaching and organizing human societies. Could this south have been Antarctica, remembered in myth as the origin place of divine knowledge? The Mapuche people of southern Chile maintain oral traditions of a great land that once existed further south, connected to their ancestral territories. These stories describe journeys across cold seas to reach this land, and speak of its eventual disappearance beneath ice and storm. While such traditions are fragmentary and difficult to date, they suggest that the indigenous peoples closest to Antarctica may have preserved memories of it through centuries or even millennia. Polynesian navigation traditions offer perhaps the most compelling parallel. Polynesians settled virtually every habitable island in the Pacific, accomplishing feats of navigation that Western scholars long considered impossible without modern instruments. They navigated by stars, by wave patterns, by the flight paths of birds, and by subtle changes in ocean swell. Their oral traditions preserve detailed knowledge of islands thousands of miles apart, including islands that had been abandoned for generations. If Polynesians could maintain such precise geographical knowledge across vast distances, could other maritime cultures have done the same for Antarctica? Maori traditions from New Zealand speak of the explorer Uite Rangiora, who around 650 CE sailed far enough south to encounter a frozen ocean and lands of ice. While this may refer to subantarctic islands or pack ice, rather than Antarctica proper, it demonstrates that Polynesian navigators were probing the southern limits of the ocean long before European explorers arrived. If they reached so far south in recorded tradition, how much further might earlier, unrecorded expeditions have traveled? The ubiquity of flood myths across human cultures has long intrigued scholars. The biblical flood, the Epic of Gilgamesh, Greek myths of Deucalion, Hindu stories of Manu, Chinese, tales of Ganyu. Nearly every ancient culture maintains some tradition of a world-destroying deluge. Geologists explain these myths as cultural memories of rising sea levels at the end of the last ice age, when melting glaciers raised ocean levels by more than 300 feet, drowning coastal settlements and river valleys worldwide. These floods would have been gradual by geological standards, occurring over centuries, but to human communities, they would have seemed catastrophic. The slow, relentless swallowing of ancestral lands. But some myths speak not just of flood, but of ice. Norse mythology describes Fimal winter, a great winter lasting 3 years, bringing endless snow and cold before the final battle of Ragnarok. While clearly mythological in its details, the core image, a world plunged into unnatural cold, may preserve memory of climate catastrophes like the Younger Dryas. If Antarctic communities experience the advance of ice sheets during such events, their stories of fleeing the growing cold might have been carried northward by refugees, eventually becoming part of the mythological landscape of cultures far removed from their origin. The Greek myth of Phaethon tells of the sun's chariot falling from the sky, scorching some parts of Earth and freezing others. Ancient writers interpreted this as a metaphor for cosmic catastrophe, perhaps a comet impact or unusual astronomical event. Modern researchers have noted that myths of celestial disasters correlate with periods of known climate disruption. If such an event contributed to Antarctica's rapid glaciation, it might explain why myths of ice, flood, and cosmic catastrophe so often intertwine. What emerges from this mythological survey is not proof, but pattern. The recurrence of certain themes, lost lands, sudden catastrophe, knowledge preserved from before disaster, suggests that human cultures have been processing traumatic climate events for thousands of years. Whether these myths contain specific memories of Antarctica is impossible to prove, but they demonstrate that memory can persist far longer than written records, encoded in stories that survive precisely because they resonate with something deep in the human psyche. The knowledge that what was built can be destroyed, that civilizations are impermanent, and that the world has not always been as it is now. If Antarctica did harbor an early civilization, and if that civilization was destroyed by advancing ice, then myths of lost lands would be its epitaph, the only grave marker remaining for a people who left no other trace. The myths would be whispers across millennia, fragments of memory so old that they have become confused with dreams. Whether we believe them or dismiss them as imagination, they continue to ask their haunting question. What if something was forgotten? What if the ice remembers what we do not? The modern scientific exploration of Antarctica began not with wonder, but with competition. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, the continent became a prize in what historians call the heroic age of Antarctic exploration, a period when national prestige and individual glory were won through suffering in the ice. Ernest Shackleton, Robert Falcon Scott, Roald Amundsen, and others led expeditions of extraordinary hardship, dragging sledges across glaciers, surviving months of darkness, some perishing mere miles from safety. Their goal was the South Pole, but their legacy was the revelation of Antarctica as a vast, inhospitable, and almost entirely unknown territory. These early explorers returned with stories, but also with data. They collected rock samples, observed weather patterns, documented wildlife, and most importantly, they mapped. Each expedition pushed the boundaries of the known world a little further inland, sketching coastlines, recording mountain ranges, measuring ice depth. But their methods were primitive by today's standards. Without radar or satellite imagery, they could only observe what lay on the surface. The continent beneath the ice remained invisible. The transformation of Antarctic research came with technology. In 1957 to 58, the International Geophysical Year brought scientists from 12 nations to Antarctica in an unprecedented cooperative effort. This collaboration laid the groundwork for the Antarctic Treaty and established Antarctica as a continent devoted to scientific research rather than territorial conquest. More practically, it brought new tools: seismometers to probe the structure of the ice sheet, gravimeters to map bedrock beneath the surface, and aircraft equipped with instruments that could survey vast areas impossible to reach on foot. The first revelation from these surveys was the sheer thickness of the ice. In some regions, the ice sheet reaches depths of nearly 3 miles, a vertical distance greater than the height of the world's tallest mountains. Under such weight, the bedrock has been pressed down, creating depressions and valleys that, without the ice, would fill with seawater. East and West Antarctica, it became clear, are not a single continent, but two landmasses held together by ice. Remove the ice, and Antarctica would appear as an archipelago of large islands separated by channels of ocean. Ice-penetrating radar, developed in the 1960s and refined over subsequent decades, allowed scientists to see through the ice for the first time. Radar pulses sent from aircraft or satellites penetrate the ice sheet and reflect off the bedrock below, creating images of the hidden landscape. These surveys revealed features no human had ever seen: mountain ranges, valleys, lakes, and ancient riverbeds, all frozen in time beneath kilometers of ice. The Gamburtsev Mountains were discovered this way, their existence completely unsuspected until radar detected their peaks rising from the bedrock. The discovery of subglacial lakes was even more astonishing. Lake Vostok, identified in the 1970s and confirmed in the 1990s, is the largest of over 400 such lakes now known to exist beneath the Antarctic ice. These lakes are kept liquid, not by sunlight, but by geothermal heat from the Earth's interior and by the insulating pressure of the ice above them. They represent isolated ecosystems sealed away from the surface world for potentially millions of years. When Russian scientists finally drilled into Lake Vostok in 2012, the samples they retrieved contained microbial DNA, evidence of life persisting in absolute darkness, in conditions more alien than any environment on Earth's surface. The existence of these lakes raises profound questions. If life can survive in such environments, what else might be preserved in similar conditions? Could ancient organic material, perhaps even evidence of past human activity, remain intact in sediments beneath the ice? The cold and isolation that preserve microbial life would equally preserve wood, fabric, or bone. Any settlement buried by advancing glaciers would enter a state of suspended animation, protected from the decay that destroys archaeological sites in warmer climates. Ice core drilling has provided another window into Antarctica's past. Scientists extract cylindrical cores of ice, sometimes from depths exceeding 2 miles, creating a chronological record of atmospheric conditions stretching back 800,000 years. Each layer of ice contains tiny bubbles of ancient air, trapped when snow compressed into ice. By analyzing these bubbles, researchers can measure past concentrations of carbon dioxide, methane, and other gases, reconstructing the planet's climate history with extraordinary precision. These cores reveal a planet that has oscillated between ice ages and warm periods in regular cycles, driven by subtle variations in Earth's orbit and axial tilt. They show abrupt climate shifts, periods when temperatures change dramatically within decades, disrupting ecosystems worldwide. The Younger Dryas event appears clearly in the record, a sharp cooling that interrupted the warming trend at the end of the last ice age, plunging much of the northern hemisphere back into glacial conditions for over 1,000 years. The cause remains debated. Theories include comet impacts, shifts in ocean circulation, or freshwater pulses from melting ice sheets. But the reality of the event is unquestioned. For those who speculate about lost civilizations, these climate records are crucial. They establish that rapid, catastrophic climate change is not merely possible, but has occurred multiple times in human prehistory. A civilization thriving during a warm period could be overwhelmed by climate shifts occurring within a single human lifetime. The preservation of climate data in ice cores means that evidence of such civilizations, if it exists, might be detectable as anomalies in atmospheric composition, traces of smoke from burning, unusual concentrations of certain elements, or other signatures of human activity preserved as chemical ghosts. Modern satellite technology has added another layer of observation. High-resolution imaging can detect subtle variations in ice surface elevation, revealing structures hidden below. Synthetic aperture radar penetrates clouds and darkness, mapping the continent regardless of weather or season. Gravitational anomaly mapping detects variations in rock density beneath the ice, highlighting geological features like ancient impact craters or volcanic chambers. Each of these technologies contributes pieces to the puzzle of what lies beneath. One such gravitational survey detected the Wilkes Land anomaly in East Antarctica, a massive circular feature buried beneath the ice, approximately 300 kilometers in diameter. Some geologists interpret this as an impact crater created by an asteroid strike around 250 million years ago, potentially contributing to the Permian-Triassic extinction event that wiped out most life on Earth. Others argue the feature is volcanic in origin, but to fringe researchers, the circular symmetry suggests something artificial, perhaps the remains of massive construction, a crater-like city or installation built on a scale beyond any known civilization. Without drilling, the truth remains inaccessible. Another controversial finding comes from radar surveys showing geometric patterns in ice structure, parallel lines, right angles, and regular grids that some interpret as too organized to be natural. Mainstream science explains these as patterns created by ice flow, where glaciers deform over underlying bedrock features, creating regular stress patterns in the ice. But the debate illustrates a fundamental challenge. When everything is buried beneath miles of ice, interpretation becomes paramount. The same data can support radically different conclusions depending on the assumptions brought to it. Perhaps the most significant limitation on Antarctic research is the Antarctic Treaty itself. Signed in 1959 during the Cold War, the treaty designated Antarctica as a scientific preserve, prohibiting military activity, nuclear testing, and mineral exploitation. It froze all territorial claims and opened the continent to international scientific cooperation. This has been extraordinarily successful at preventing conflict and protecting the environment. But it also means that large-scale excavation projects, which would be necessary to definitively answer questions about buried ruins or artifacts, are effectively forbidden. Disturbing the ice sheet on the scale needed for archaeological investigation would violate the treaty's environmental protections. Thus, science has brought us to the threshold of Antarctica's secrets, but cannot yet cross it. We can map what lies beneath. We can detect anomalies and speculate about their origin. We can prove the continent was once habitable and that rapid climate change could have destroyed any civilization there. But we cannot dig, cannot excavate, cannot hold in our hands the definitive proof that would settle the question. The ice remains the final barrier, both preserving whatever secrets it holds and preventing us from discovering them. In this sense, Antarctica exists in a state of permanent mystery, known yet unknowable, mapped yet inaccessible, a continent where science and speculation meet at the edge of what can be proven. Night settles over Antarctica in slow motion, a darkness that lasts for months. In winter, the sun never rises above the horizon, and the continent becomes a realm of twilight and stars, where auroras shimmer in silence and ice crystals fall from clear skies. In this darkness, human presence shrinks to a handful of research stations, their lights tiny pinpricks against an incomprehensible vastness. The rest is emptiness, 3 million square miles of frozen wilderness where no human footstep has ever fallen, where the wind sculpts the surface into forms no one will ever see. In such emptiness, imagination grows. It is human nature to fill silence with story, absence with meaning. We cannot help but wonder what lies beneath, what the ice might be keeping from us. Perhaps there is nothing, only rock and sediment, the bones of ancient seas, geological features that would fascinate scientists but change no fundamental understanding of history. This is the likely truth, the answer that evidence and probability favor. Antarctica may be exactly what it appears, a place of stone and ice, dramatic in its geology, but empty of human legacy. But the possibility remains. It refuses to be fully dismissed. The maps that show coastlines they should not show. The myths that speak of lands erased by catastrophe. The geological evidence of habitable windows when ice retreated and life could flourish. The radar anomalies that suggest, however faintly, something more than random geology. These fragments do not prove anything, but they preserve the question. They keep alive the unsettling thought that our understanding of human origins might be incomplete, that the story we tell ourselves about where we came from and how we developed might be missing its first chapter. If Antarctica does hide the remains of the first civilization, then almost everything we believe about human history would need revision. The slow, gradual development from hunter-gatherers to agricultural societies to cities would be revealed as only one thread in a more complex tapestry. There would have been an earlier experiment, perhaps as sophisticated as anything that came after, but separated from later civilizations by catastrophe and amnesia. Its achievements would be our forgotten inheritance, its downfall our unlearned lesson. The ice would have been its apocalypse. Imagine living through such an ending, watching the climate shift, feeling winters grow longer and summers fail to arrive, seeing the snow accumulate year after year until it never melts, until it begins to compress into ice, until glaciers start to flow down valleys like slow rivers of stone. There would be no fighting it, no technology capable of stopping such a force. There would only be the choice to flee or to die. Some might have escaped, carrying fragments of their culture to distant lands, where they became the mysterious teachers of later peoples, the source of sudden advances in agriculture, astronomy, or architecture that appear in the archaeological record with no clear precedent. Others might have remained, either unable to leave or choosing to stay with their ancestral lands until the end. Their cities, if cities they were, would have been buried gradually, year by year, century by century, until the ice swallowed even the memory of their existence. Everything they built, everything they knew, would have been pressed into the bedrock by the sheer weight of ice, preserved in a tomb that would last longer than any pyramid, hidden more completely than any lost treasure. This is speculation, but it is not baseless fantasy. The mechanisms exist. Antarctica was habitable at times in the past. Humans had the capacity to reach it. Climate change can erase civilizations, and ice preserves what it buries. The only question is whether these possibilities ever aligned, whether humans actually reached Antarctica when it was habitable, whether they stayed long enough to leave traces, and whether those traces still exist beneath the ice. We cannot answer that question without excavation, and excavation is forbidden. We are left with permanent doubt. Perhaps this is appropriate. Perhaps some mysteries should remain unsolved, some silences unbroken. Antarctica exists as one of the last places on Earth where nature completely dominates, where human presence is temporary and tentative, where we are visitors rather than inhabitants. To excavate it, to drill through miles of ice in search of ruins that may not exist, would be to impose ourselves on one of the few spaces we have left untouched. The environmental cost might be too high, the disruption to fragile ecosystems too severe. The knowledge we might gain might not be worth what we would destroy in gaining it. And yet, the question persists. It lives in the back of the mind, in the pause before sleep, in moments when the familiar world seems too small to contain all that might have been. What if Antarctica is hiding something? What if the first civilization lies beneath the ice waiting? What if our history is incomplete, our origins more mysterious than we admit? These questions have no answers, not yet, perhaps not ever, but they have power. They keep us curious, keep us questioning, keep us from settling into the comfortable certainty that we know all there is to know about where we came from. Antarctica, in its silence, in its inaccessibility, in its permanent mystery, reminds us that the world is larger than our understanding of it, that there are still blank spaces on the map, not blank because they are empty, but blank because we cannot read what is written there. The ice keeps its secrets. It presses down with the weight of millions of years, crushing questions into silence, preserving whatever truth it holds in darkness and cold. We stand at the edge of that ice with our instruments and theories, measuring what we can measure, interpreting what we can interpret, knowing that the real answers lie beyond our reach. Whether those answers would confirm our speculations or shatter them, whether they would reveal forgotten greatness, or only confirm that we were always alone in our development, we cannot say. What we can say is this: Antarctica was not always frozen. Life flourished there once. Climate can change with terrifying speed, Civilizations can be erased. Memory is fragile, and ice, patient and cold, preserves what it buries better than any other force on Earth. If humanity ever reached that frozen continent when it was still green, if we ever built there, loved there, thrived there, and then fled or perished when the ice came, then the evidence still exists, locked in the world's greatest archive, waiting for a time when we are ready to read it. Until that time, Antarctica remains what it has always been, the continent of possibility, the frozen edge of the known world, the place where history might be hiding, where the first civilization might sleep beneath, ice 3 miles deep, dreaming in the dark, waiting for voices that may never call its name. The wind blows across the plateau, sculpting snow into forms that suggest meaning, ridges that could be walls, depressions that could be plazas, symmetries that could be design. Or they are nothing, only random patterns that human minds impose on chaos, seeing faces in clouds, structures in snow, history in absence. The ice does not care which interpretation we choose. It continues its slow, crushing embrace of whatever lies beneath, indifferent to our curiosity, immune to our questions, eternal in its silence. And in that silence, the mystery remains.